This podcast may contain sensitive material that may not be suitable for everyone. Information shared is based on personal experiences and not meant to replace medical or other professional help.
It was definitely a great icebreaker when I was meeting with donors to tell them that there was a movie about the work that we did. There's a statistic I read somewhere that we spend more time with our bosses than our spouses. When we lose that part of our lives, it can be intense. It's like a breakup with a significant other or a divorce. So suddenly being out of work, I was struggling with my mental health and my own self worth.
What do you do when it feels like the rug's being pulled from underneath your feet? In fact, the whole floor. Welcome to the Uprooted by Unwanted Change podcast about managing life transitions. I'm Kiran Prasad, teacher, speaker, and author of A Mindful Move, Feel at Home Again, based on my 29 house moves. On each episode, we'll focus on a topic of unwanted change with guests sharing stories of resilience and insights into how they navigated their journeys. Together, we'll discover a community of inspiring individuals and create a system of support for one another. We have one such individual with us today, Josh Berger. Welcome, Josh.
Hey, how are you doing, Karen? Grateful to be here with you and your audience.
Thanks, doing great. And welcome to our listeners. Today, our episode is about being uprooted by job loss. First, just some background information about Josh. Josh is a college admissions strategist who found his vocational calling after being furloughed from AVP First during the pandemic. Since then, he's guided over 200 families nationwide through the application process with creativity, strategy, and heart. Drawing from his education in business and leadership, along with his time at the education equity nonprofit, the Freedom Writers Foundation, Josh empowers students to discover themselves and their stories so they can pursue their goals with clarity and confidence. Josh, I love that you help shape the future of the students you work with. But what would you say has been the greatest shaping factor in your own life? Tell us a bit about that.
Yeah, I come from an incredibly close family. I have an older sister. She's about 3 years older than me. And like many other Jewish families, I'm sure education was always something that was one of the most important values that we were taught, right? Education is the key to success was something that my sister and I would hear a lot growing up. Not just monetary success, but intrinsic success, right? Something that was just part of leading a more fulfilling life. So I'm sure my Jewish background played a part in that philosophy and the pursuit of knowledge being a big part of most of the Jewish teachings. More than that, it was my parents who understood the power that education could have on making life not only easier, but more enjoyable. Ironically, though, neither of them completed a 4 year degree, at least at a traditional university. They attended community college and were mentored in the finance space, which is what they do together today, their own company. But that being said, they are incredibly educated people. I tell people that my dad has a PhD in street smarts from the University of Hard Knocks. He grew up in New York, has worked nearly his whole life.
Right.
And then when my grandpa passed away pretty suddenly from a heart attack when my dad was only about 22, he took on a much more substantial role in his family's business. So I've never met anyone who just knows how to read a person more accurately or quickly in my life. That's definitely something that he has taught me. My mom, meanwhile, had been accepted to Stanford right out of high school, but ended up not going to take care of her own family matters. It was interesting growing up in this environment, but understanding firsthand still how important it was for my sister and me to take advantage of the educational opportunities that were presented us. Um, that being said, I was an absolute headache for my parents and teachers when I was younger. I would always finish my schoolwork before others. And so I'd get up and I'd get bored and I would talk to people. And I'm sure there was a brief period when my parents weren't even quite sure whether I'd get to college, but I buckled down around high school. And when I was accepted to Chapman University, which is a smaller liberal arts college here in Southern California, I just completely threw myself into my studies and ended up graduating the top 4% of my class. following a path that little did I know at the time would continue to be steeped in education and in the values that I was brought up in, including my first job as director of development for the Freedom Writers Foundation, as well as eventually director of development for AVP First.
So, first of all, why don't you tell us what Freedom Writers Foundation is? It sounds intriguing.
Sure. So in June 2018, I began working as a director of development for the Freedom Writers Foundation, which is an education equity nonprofit. They're based in Long Beach. I had interned with them during college as part of my leadership studies program. And as director of development, I was in charge of funding the programming. So I wrote grants, I organized fundraisers, managed relationships with donors, that kind of stuff. It may sound a little familiar to you or your listeners because there was actually a 2007 film with Hilary Swank who portrayed my boss, Aaron Gruelle. I think that's pretty cool. It was definitely a great icebreaker when I was meeting with donors to tell them that there was a movie about the work that we did. And I think, unlike most other Hollywood films, it actually captures the story pretty well about this woman who worked with about 150 students who were not destined to graduate high school. They were struggling academically. They had a lot going on in their personal lives. Through this curriculum that she developed and the relationships that she built with them, all 150 students ended up graduating and going on to do amazing things. So the Freedom Writers Foundation was created following that in order to provide teachers and students around the world with resources so that they could accomplish that same success inside and outside of the classroom. I really enjoyed my work. I definitely was not making anything close to what you'd call a competitive salary, especially in Southern California. But I woke up every day knowing that there was a very clear why to what I was doing. That purpose was worth so much more to me at the time than any amount of money, especially right out of college. It was like I received a psychic or karmic paycheck every day.
Oh, I love that karmic paycheck. So, when did you start working for AVP First? Because isn't that the place where you got furloughed from?
Yeah, you're correct. I began working with AVP First in August of 2019, and they're the nonprofit arm of AVP, which is the Association of Volleyball Professionals, sort of similar to like an MLB or NBA, one of those big professional sports leagues, but for volleyball specifically. And it was a lot of fun. I didn't know anything about volleyball at the time. I remember in the first conversation I had with the gentleman who ended up being my executive director, I asked him point blank, I was like, "Is it okay that I don't watch the sport or play it?" And he was like, "Of course, you'll learn on the job." That was reassuring. What we did was we set up these volleyball programs in lower income, higher need communities throughout Orange County, mainly in LA County. It was a way for the kids that we worked with to not only have fun, stay physically fit, but also develop these really important life skills like communication and collaboration, conflict resolution, discipline, all of the things that would naturally come up as part of playing a sport. So it was a great way to engage kids who may not have had access to something like volleyball, in their own communities. What we were trying to do was bridge the gap between those recreational teams that we were creating in these communities across Southern California and the Professional Volleyball League. Yes, you also are correct that it was where I was furloughed. It came as quite a shock, truthfully. Everything was going well when I had joined. AVP First had come under this new ownership by a gentleman named Donald Sun, alongside another guy, John too, who, funnily enough, was a big donor to the Freedom Writers Foundation around the time the movie came out. So that was a really interesting connection.
That's quite a coincidence. Yeah.
Yeah, it was. It was really surprising, but it felt like that was one of life's signs that I was in the right place, just because there was that connecting thread. So it came under Donald Sun, and suddenly we went from being truthfully near bankruptcy to feeling financially saved. We had more money that we could use to buy equipment and host events, and more staff to help with the marketing and other resources that allowed us to do the programming as best as it could be. It was gaining real traction. We were working on solidifying that pipeline between the youth camps that we were organizing and the AVP, and giving great kids a chance to turn pro and earn some money. So things were looking up, and it was an exciting time to be at the forefront of this organization in particular. And I was really thrilled to be contributing to it.
It does sound like very fulfilling, great work that you were doing with students. And then what was the turning point? You kind of touched on it. When did things start to change for you?
Yeah, everything changed in March 2020, which I'm sure is a period of time that's burned in everyone's head. COVID happened, and of course, as all your listeners know, the world completely shut down. So I was furloughed shortly after in March of 2020. My boss was very transparent about things to his credit. He told me he had no idea if or when we would return. And I was 24 at the time, really in the beginning stages of building my career, and it just felt like the rug was completely pulled out from under me. I went through a pretty rough period, if I'm being honest. Just the state of the world was anxiety inducing enough. And then not knowing much about the virus at the time and seeing your friends or loved ones get sick and um, even pass away, I was struggling with my mental health and my own self worth. Uh, I applied to so many jobs, but this was really before remote work took off. So I felt like everyone was in the same position of just, hey, we don't know what's going on. We can't bring you on until we know what's happening. It was this very weird limbo period, I suppose, where everyone was waiting to see how long this whole thing would last. And then it just kept going and going. And I thought, after 2 months, something will come up, right? And then 2 months became 3 months, and 3 months became 4 months, and then 5 months. So yeah, people just weren't hiring.
Yeah, that must have been very challenging for you. I love your description of it being a weird limbo period. That's something I'm very familiar with, and I've written about this phase. To quote Jeff Bracken, organizational change consultant, he refers to it as the in-between stage when you have to let go of one trapeze and you have not yet grasped the other trapeze that you hope is coming your way. So, how did you cope during this in between limbo phase?
That's such a great way to describe it. I love that quote from Jeff Bracken. It definitely felt like floating in midair. It was similar if anyone's an athlete, it's those feelings of the butterflies in your stomach before the big game, right? You've made the jump, but you've not yet quite landed. And I think part of the reason why it's so scary is that anything can happen in midair, right? You're between one certainty and another, and nothing is quite solid. And so I just needed a way to take my mind off of all the big feelings that I was experiencing at this time. The way that I did that was by volunteering with my local synagogue, University Synagogue in Irvine. I was
Mhm.
mostly doing socially distanced work, delivering holiday baskets for congregation members, that sort of thing. But it was just nice to get out of the house and take my mind off of everything. Funnily enough, again, one of those right place, right time moments, although I didn't quite know it then, was eventually I was asked if I would be willing to do some grocery shopping for Shirley, who was an 80-year-old congregational member, although you'd never know it by her personality. And she was immunocompromised and essentially quarantined inside of her house. But of course, I was happy to help. Uh, at that time, I only had one living grandparent. So it felt like an opportunity to develop a relationship with someone else who might be able to be this older, experienced figure. And so I was looking forward to that. And the first time I met her, I was completely stunned. She is such a character, like literally someone out of a sitcom. She was a professional singer, so she would just randomly break out into song. And she's just so honest with her thoughts and feelings. I really felt a kinship with her right from the get go. It started off with me going to the market for her about once a week. She'd write me these very detailed shopping lists, and I actually kept one as a memento. Um, and it would say things in like all capital letters, like she was shouting at me. So uh, she'd write like navel oranges, Valencia second choice, firm, not organic, spoiled too quickly. Like all these little notes. But it made me smile. It made the shopping easier.
Mm.
Um, and so after bringing in her groceries and helping her unload everything because she was fairly weak at the time, we'd start by just exchanging a few pleasantries, and then these sort of evolved into lengthier conversations about our lives and the state of the world and anything else we thought of because we often went off on tangents. And I'm sure we were both really thankful just to have someone in person, nonetheless, to talk to about experiencing the isolation and um, being able to commiserate with one another and find solidarity. It was a really, really powerful thing that I did not take for granted at the time and certainly don't, all these years later. Um, but eventually I was seeing Shirley a few times a week, Sometimes just to market, sometimes to take her to like a doctor's appointment, or other times just to walk around her complex so she could get some fresh air and exercise, or sometimes just to sit and talk. And our meetings became longer, the conversations became more personal. But her companionship was pretty crucial for me as I was weathering that isolation that I had felt and the insecurity just brought on by being furloughed from COVID. It was huge.
Oh, I'm so glad you had Shirley. She sounds like a very interesting character.
She is.
Uh, so, what did it feel like? You've mentioned a bit, but what did it feel like to be uprooted from the work you were so passionate about? And what were some of the challenges you faced? You've mentioned a few.
Yeah, I was pretty devastated. I think so much of my identity had been tied up in the work that I did. I was really proud of my work, unlike most people who I think see their jobs as a, a prison sentence or maybe something not quite as glamorous just to get through and get their paycheck. I was really proud of my work. And, I had a business degree from a good school. I had graduated with honors. I suppose in my naivete, I guess I had assumed that I would find another job quickly. Maybe truthfully even felt somewhat entitled to one. Like I had worked so hard, and to have nothing to show for it at that stage was really difficult for me to manage. So I was struggling to understand why it was so difficult to find a new job. And I remember feeling a lot of just insecurity and fear at the time. I questioned what I would do going forward, if I even wanted to stay in the nonprofit development space, knowing that it wasn't the most lucrative, and seeing in moments like COVID how important it was to have a financial cushion when life uproots you for one reason or another. It was difficult. I felt like I was experiencing a lot of different crossroads at once.
Then you mentioned about the cushion. Then how did you manage financially for so long? Were you able to turn to others for support financially or otherwise?
Definitely. Living at home at the time was a huge blessing. It allowed me to nest away a good amount of savings as I was working. So I was able to use that to find my footing. And I really have to thank my parents for always having their doors open to my sister and me. And it just meant so much to be together during such a scary time. And looking back, just special to share that time together. It was huge. The love and support of family and friends, that coupled with the um, the government assistance, was allowed me to sort of weather that storm until I was able to find something else.
Mhm. Yeah, I'm so glad you did have that support. It's great when you have somebody helping you out. What did you find was the most surprising part about experiencing a furlough or job loss?
That's a good question. I think the most surprising part about experiencing sudden job loss was twofold. Firstly, it was just incredibly jarring, like I mentioned, to feel out of control. I had worked so hard in college. I had exerted almost authoritarian levels of control over my academics of my work, and I'd found success. Suddenly being out of work, not being able to find another job, and not due to any lack of merit per se, but just due to situations outside of my control, it was really uncomfortable for me to deal with. But then I think within that lies the second surprise, and thankfully a more pleasant one, which is that through the discomfort, I was able to teach myself how to find peace and even joy in these chaotic moments of transition. Because the reality is that being furloughed presented tons of opportunities to me that I think would have passed by had I been working, right? I likely would have never met someone like Shirley, who's one of my dearest friends today. I wouldn't be where I am doing what I am. I can see now that those changes were fulcrum points where I was able to really pivot and create a new pathway going forward. I'm reminded of this phrase that my mom had always told us growing up, which is the tree that bends is the one that survives the storm. And I think being uprooted, regardless of what the reason is, definitely teaches you how to be more flexible. I learned how to be more comfortable with being uncomfortable, and to find ways to create my own sense of peace, through service and connection and community.
Being comfortable with being uncomfortable. I like that, and I like what your mother said about the tree bending that survives the storm. So then, how did you eventually find a job?
Through Shirley. So shout out to her again. In one of our many conversations, I had shared that throughout college, I had tutored elementary and high school kids in math, and I was thinking about sort of starting my own tutoring company. I didn't really know what it looked like, but I had studied business entrepreneurship in college, and I was thinking, okay, this might be the way forward is to take something I love and monetize it, right? Turn my passion into profit, so to speak. She just happened to know someone, funnily enough, who wasn't a subject tutor, but they had their own private college admissions business, and her grandson had worked with them, and so she had offered to see if she could connect us, and maybe I was able to get some advice on how to make the pivot to full-time entrepreneur. But funnily enough, again, in one of life's many surprising moments, when I connected with this individual, we just hit it off, and he asked if I wanted to work with him before going out on my own and sort of learn the ropes. And what I thought would be a temporary stay ended up being over 4 years, if you can believe it. So I learned a ton about the college admissions process, also how to manage a larger number of clients. I would be working with anywhere from 50 to 60 clients per year. It was great to just cut my teeth on learning how to really manage my own process and help others navigate this exciting milestone in their lives. I definitely think it was a period that solidified my passion for supporting others and trying to help people unlock their full potential and ultimately pursue higher education.
Mm. I love that. What karma you got from helping Shirley? That's wonderful. With the benefit of hindsight, do you have any words of wisdom for someone facing job loss?
Work is such a big part of our identities, and not to get on a soapbox or anything, but especially as Americans living in this hyper capitalist society, work is integral to our daily lives. There's a statistic I read somewhere that we spend more time with our bosses than our spouses. When we lose that part of our lives, it can be intense. It's like a breakup with a significant other or a divorce. So when I went through being furloughed, it was this intense grieving process for this part of my life that I had known and loved for about 2.5 years. E- I had to be careful. There's a dangerous cyclicality to negative emotions, and it's totally normal and healthy to feel upset or disappointed, depressed. However, it's important to recognize that these emotions can also bind us. And so the most effective way that I found to liberate myself from these feelings was to step outside of me, right, and myself and do something for someone else. And so I found that the more habitually I stepped into that mindset, the better that I felt. I would say if you're able to be, in my mom's words, the tree that bends, then perhaps you might be able to embrace change as an opportunity for growth. As uncomfortable and stressful as being uprooted was, it exposed me to opportunities that I wouldn't have found had it not happened. And again, with the benefit of hindsight 5 years later, I know now that I was able to dig my roots somewhere else and learn nearly half a decade later when I started my own college admissions consulting business that those roots could be dug even more deeply than they were before. So keep going.
Mhm. Well, tell us about Summit, the business you started this year. Had you ever run a business before? I mean, did you ever imagine yourself even running a business?
That's a great question, Kieran. Funnily enough, although I had gone to school for entrepreneurship, I hadn't thought so far ahead as what owning a business would look like. So, other than my own tutoring business where I had, 8 to 10 clients at a time and was fairly informal, no, I had no experience running a business. Summit, which is my own college admissions practice now, where I provide personalized strategy and support at an hourly rate to families so that they can navigate the process more effectively. It was really brand new. It was very intimidating, quite frankly, for me at first to learn how to build the website, use billing software, write contracts, all that stuff. I'm sure you can relate, Karen, in building this
Mhm.
wonderful podcast. It's not always an easy or intuitive process, but thankfully, I was able to lean on the support and knowledge of my loved ones. The day I left, if you can believe it, as intense emotionally as it was when I left the job that I'd been at for 4 years to start my own business. My mom helped me register Summit, and my girlfriend has been especially instrumental in helping me build my online presence and just being an emotional anchor for me. I had to learn how to be patient with myself and give myself grace that there were some things that I'd need to learn along the way. And I I'd say that I truly believed with a worthy enough mission that others would see the vision and choose to join me on this journey. My whole goal with Summit is to make the college admissions process more equitable for families. And I think that was really born out of my desire to follow in the footsteps of past role models in my life, like Aaron Gruwell and the Freedom Writers Foundation ethos, to empower others, and especially those who may come from these more vulnerable communities through education. Many of these admission services are locked behind very steep paywalls, right? Either subscriptions or package deals that easily can run families over $15,000. And it made me sad to think how many people out there were eager to make the most of their college applications, but couldn't take advantage of that support because of financial limitations. And I know that because I was one of those students. My own family would not have been able to afford a service like that when I was applying to college. So creating Summit is a chance to level the playing field and dismantling this sort of pay to play model that the industry has turned into. And so I charge an intentionally competitive rate. I utilize an hourly model so that families can choose when and how they engage with me. And I'm even investing a portion of my profits into what I call a Summit Scholars Program, which will give thousands of dollars to students from these underserved communities so that they can make the most of their own college education. My hope is for students to earn admission into schools that they would not only love, that are great programs for them, but more importantly, align with what they're looking for in their college experience. I really want and hope that Summit will redefine what success looks like. As scary as it was, and despite not having much experience prior, I've figured things out, and I'm incredibly humbled to share that now, only 5 months into this new venture, I've really settled into a rhythm, and I'm making more than I ever had with my previous employer. I'm happier than I was. I feel more fulfilled in my work than I've ever been before. And so, my send off to your listeners is to those who may be thinking about turning one of their passions into a full time venture. Take that leap of faith. You may surprise yourself.
That's so inspiring. I really love how you're giving back to underserved communities and those who can't afford to pay top dollar for these type of college consultancy services. Is this something you offer online or only in person?
My services are conducted almost 100% virtually, although I do occasionally see students in person who are in my local area of Orange County, but I work with students across the country, so it's that's not always feasible, right? But I thought about getting an office space for a while, but the feedback I've received has been super positive, thankfully. People really seem to appreciate the convenience of being able to meet wherever they are. And I'd like to think that I'm personable enough that my ability to create and foster these relationships transcends screens. And so I'm able to form these genuine bonds with my students, and they don't seem to notice the difference.
Yeah, you certainly do come across as personable.
Thank you.
If our listeners would like to contact you and learn more about your service, how can they do that or to stay in touch with you in some way?
I appreciate you asking. I'd say the best way is to visit my website, summitcollegejourney.com, and they can learn a little bit more about my services and approach there. I have an FAQ that they can check out, even some student and parent testimonials that'll help shed more light on their experience in the process. So that would be the best way, I would think.
Well, Josh, you've been you're such an inspiring young man living your purpose. No doubt you've brought hope to others about turning their life around after job loss. We really appreciate your time and hearing about your story of resilience.
Thanks for having me, Karen. Appreciate it.
You're welcome. And thank you, listeners, for joining us today. If you enjoyed listening to today's podcast and found it helpful, please subscribe, share, and join our Uprooted by Unwanted Change Facebook group. The new episodes will be brought to you every Tuesday, wherever you get your podcast, including a YouTube version with captions. In the midst of chaos and uncertainty, may you find peace and rootedness.